Hey, buddy, how are you?
How we doing?
Doing good, dude. I was just about to introduce you, but why don't you? I like it when people tell their own story. Do you mind kind of telling our viewers a little bit about yourself and your background and where you are now and where you're headed?
Yeah, I guess. Isn't this so funny that of all the questions that you could be asked, this tends to be the most difficult one?
Yeah, I know. I've been on podcasts and well, plus you got to tell the same story over and over, so it gets old. I'd like to mix it up, but just
I
do your
love
best.
it.
You don't have to go. You don't have to go crazy with it.
No, I love it. So, for anyone that I haven't met, my name is Matthew Paetz. My background is in psychology, but what I focus on primarily are early childhood survival patterns and root cause emotional trauma. And I'll say this right off the bat, you do not get into this work because you have your shit together. So
Mhm.
know that anything that we discuss, share it. This work really stems from a life lived and not just, the regurgitation of, several fancy books. So I truly believe it's my mission in this space to be uncomfortably transparent when necessary.
Well, I
And
like
by
that.
uncomfortable, I
Uncomfortably
mean,
transparent. I always use the term brutally honest.
mm,
That's a new twist on that, and I like it.
yeah, I could launch into just you know, a very lengthy conversation around this, but I guess I'll turn it back over to you. And I'm excited to just be here. I'm honored that, to be a guest and be presented here. So,
Yeah, man. Well, thanks for being on. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, getting a little bit more into, I mean, I find that people's stories are fascinating. So, without going into, like you said, super detail, kind of the rundown of, was there something, did you have a good childhood, bad childhood? Like you said, nobody gets in this because they're perfect human beings.
yeah,
I myself have my own tragic story that turned it around, and now look at me, right?
yeah,
Um, and honestly, I mean, it is, and all joking aside, I mean, it is that type of stuff that I think is good to share with people and let them see that, because everybody has their own set of stuff going on, and everybody thinks it's the worst thing in the world, and oh, mine's way worse. But then you look at other people's, and you're like, wait, theirs was actually way worse, and they were able to overcome it. So, anything in your childhood? How did you have a good childhood?
yeah. I mean, I had a great childhood. It was layered. And before I launch into that, you brought up something I think it's extremely important I think for us to kind of explore, and that's the idea of, turning our traumas or our experiences into competitions, right? And we all do this, myself included. But what I find is that when it comes to connecting and finding safety within one another and our individual stories, it's the ability to look beyond the context and recognize the emotional experience, right? For example, before I launch into my story, someone may hear it and think to themselves, like, this guy, he doesn't know shit. He hasn't been through anything that I've been through, right? And they may discredit mine. Or, they could listen to my story and think to themselves like, oh, who am I to be feeling the ways that I'm feeling? I've not been through anything this guy has. And they discredit their own story.
Yep.
And I think it's important to recognize that, our experiences are relative to a large degree. And, and I'll make this make a lot more sense shortly. But like, for instance, when I go in to share my story, I'll go ahead and plug the fact that, my biggest struggle was feeling like a coward, right? And that stems from my childhood, and that was a story played out over large periods of my life. I'm 37 now, and I would say only in the past 4 years have and even more recently, have I really begun to disrupt that story in such a way that my life has begun to open and expand in the ways that I'd always dreamed. But again, I say, I struggle with feeling like a coward because even if you haven't had the same story as I have, you probably know or have had moments where you have felt like a coward yourself, right? No matter what the context. So when we're able to look at each other's story from that perspective and say like, oh man, maybe I didn't have that experience specifically, but I have had that feeling in my life. So there's much more common ground than, meets the eye, so to speak. With that, does that make sense before I just
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
perfect? but to answer your question now, as far as my childhood story, so specifically speaking to what led me to my work, you know, I experienced sexual abuse from an elder male for nearly 5 years of my childhood, from roughly 6 to 11. And, you know, that led to many struggles, you know, including struggles around identity, sexuality, you know, my self-worth. You know, for a long period of my life, I genuinely believed that my purpose was to be a physical experience for other people, so much so that it led to um, a period of my life where I was an escort. It led to drugs. It led to alcohol, and even a near suicide attempt on a drug crash. You know, it's like I said, my story is layered, and this is the Cliff Notes version. But you know, really, what that forced me to recognize was a couple of things. You know, that morning specifically, where you know, I nearly made the ultimate decision. I learned two very specific things. And the first thing that I learned that morning was that, you know, I did not want my life to end. I wanted my life as I knew it to end. And at that time, I didn't know another way, right? Or I was afraid of the other way that, you know, was being presented, which was to face it head on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then later in this experience, but in hindsight, is when I learned the second lesson, which is that if I was willing to go that far, right, and I've skipped over a lot of details because this included, you know, my life partner, Allison, my mother, and my sister. They were all on a three-way call while I was holding a loaded weapon in my hand in a complete spiral, right? None of them knew where I was.
How long ago was this? What year? Or, I mean, just
It was
approximate.
about, yeah, it was probably about 4 years ago. I think I was 33 at the time. So it was, I say that to say, like, if I was willing to go that far, right? If I was willing to put the three most important humans in my life through that particular morning, which I clearly was because I did it, then from that point forward, I no longer had the luxury of fear. And what I meant by that was, you know, I no longer could be more afraid of my truth than I was my own death. And I could no longer be more afraid of, you know, facing my insecurities and my struggles head on than I was putting, you know, those who I loved most through that morning. So from that point forward, it was like, okay, if I was willing to go this far down this path, then I had the responsibility to put that same energy into going this other direction
Mm-hmm.
and to see where that would get me.
Right. I mean,
And that,
you got two choices: do that or the latter that you were thinking about, right? So
yeah.
thank God you chose that one. And you know, so what was it that? So I mean, was it like you realized right then, like, okay, what am I doing? Or was it one of the people on the phone that helped you? And then was it like an immediate, like you turned things around, or was it like a slow progression?
So if I'm being very specific, there was a moment that morning, and again, I was on a cocaine crash specifically, and if anyone's ever experienced that, it's a lot like playing quarterback and they remove your entire front line and allow the defense to just rush you with all the negativity that you
It's a
may
good
be living
analogy.
inside of you.
Yep. Yep.
So you just have absolutely no defense. And so in that moment, I'm holding the weapon, and the thing that crossed my mind was I had this very detailed image of if I were to do this, how I would be found, right? Like my physical body with the condition it would be in, the environment, you know, someone would have to walk because it was someone else's home that I was in, you know, all these layers. And in that moment, I knew it was like, it wouldn't have been fair, right? Like, and that was a huge turning point for me, was like, I was unwilling to put others through that experience, which was just enough for me to, you know, to pull back a little bit. And then, you know, there's obviously more to this story, but eventually Allison, my partner, you know, figured out where I was, and showed up, was able to, you know, confiscate the weapon and, you know, all of that. So,
Right.
yeah.
So just to kind of relate to you, you know, I mean, when I was suicidal my senior year, well, excuse me, my freshman year of college, and I mean, definitely, you know, mine was more alcohol, but you know, drugs are obviously it's a way for you to try to mask the pain, and all it ends up doing, as you know, and anybody that's ever been down that road, is it just compounds it way more, right? It's a short-term relief, but then it's like, then you get the crash, and then you get the guilt of taking drugs and feeling like, what am I doing with my life? And it's just so much worse. And yeah, I mean, we used to call them let's see, suicide Sundays is what we used to call them, or the scaries. You know, there's different terms, but like coming down off of just a bender,
Hmm.
um, you know, of just going hard, and just you feel like you're on top of the world, and then like your brain, all that dopamine, serotonin. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know exactly how
Yeah.
it works, but I know that that's
All
all
the
just
stuff.
like goes away, and then all you're just left with the dark, scary places.
Yeah.
And so, um, thank God, you know, you were able to. It's always interesting to me. So for you, it was, you know, I don't want to have to put these people through having to deal with this mess. You know, thank God, right? Because I mean, it could have been anything, any reason, or it could have tipped the scales the other way. So, all right, so you aborted that, thank gosh.
Hmm.
And then how did you start to rebuild 4 years ago?
Well, it was interesting because, I was already pursuing a career in psychology. I was already pursuing that work, and to be in the position to support others while, all of us still struggling with it ourselves in many ways. Um, so, the biggest thing I'll say, well, I won't say the biggest thing, but one of the major turning points too was that day. So Allison, they literally, found me, put me in an Uber and sent me direct to an acute trauma specialist. So I actually went and met with a therapist that was, um, you know, we'll say highly trained in this particular, field, or this type of work. And to this day, I wouldn't know who she was if she walked in my home. But I'll never forget the first thing I remember her saying. And when I walked into her office that morning, I told myself, it's like, I'm giving her everything. Like, I'm not holding anything back. And because I
Yeah, what
wanted
did
to
you call it at
know.
the beginning of this? I call it brutal truth, brutal honesty.
Oh,
You called it.
uncomfortably transparent.
Yes, that's what you got
Yeah.
to. Otherwise, you're just. I mean, if you want
What are we
help,
doing?
you got to lay it all out on the table. You're just fooling yourself. Yeah.
And that's exactly it. I often say, like, I share my story, not to shock people, but I share my story for those that are still afraid to share their own, right? Specifically those details that you could only understand if you've ever been there yourself. Like,
Yeah, I
and
just saw
that's,
somebody said I think this podcast was meant for me. So right, I'm sure.
oh,
You know, so right, and like I said, I've been there, and you know, I think that there's different levels of, you know, like you actually got right there. There's different levels of people that have suicidal thoughts, and I think that, you know, this type of conversation is good for. It doesn't have to be like you got right to the point of pulling the trigger. It's if you're down on your life and you just feel hopeless, like, you know, this is the type of conversation you need to listen to, I feel. So just
100%. I mean,
continue.
there's a death even in living. And, there's grieving and
Yep.
shame and all of that. And I think, like I said, at the top of this conversation, these aren't, these stories are not to be compared, but rather to understand maybe a little deeper, how one gets here, how one who is in that place may be experiencing it, and so on and so forth. But to close the loop really quickly on what the therapist shared with me at the end of this, what I thought was, an hour and a half to 2 hour long, just, word vomit. Her very, very first words that I remember her saying were, and I quote, "No shit, you found cocaine. What were you supposed to do?" And I was like, wait, like, that's not what you're supposed to say. You're
Right.
supposed to, like, hit me with the, you know better, who's more important. You're supposed to give me like all those, therapy things, and then, connect me with a, NA group and all this stuff. But instead, what she did was probably one of the most profound moments of my healing journey, and um, means of education for the work that I do, which is she met me exactly where I was, right? Versus demanding me to meet her where she was.
Right.
And what that looked like for me in that moment was, she didn't give me permission to go do more drugs by saying no shit. What she gave me permission to do was to forgive myself and to experience grace for having made those decisions, gotten to this place in my life. So having her meet me where I was emotionally in that moment created a sense of safety and a feeling of being understood, not judged. And I think that's the biggest thing that we all seek, is just, this feeling of being understood, especially because most of us we don't even understand ourselves.
Right.
So when someone can sit across from us and give us some sense of understanding, that in itself is freedom, right? So
that's it, man. Yep. I know, it's amazing how, like, everybody's brain is different, and how, there's not one way to help people, unfortunately. Like, certain methods work for different people, but I think in general, like we were just saying, like, anybody that like that term, meeting you where you were versus having to, like, say, hey, this is where you need to be, come up here, like, that's just, it falls on deaf ears, because it's like, well, I can't, right? And yeah, I mean, anybody that can just get on that level of, hey, we're all human beings, and your brain works the way it works, and mine works the way it works, and at the end of the day, we all just want the exact same thing, which is to be happy. So, let's figure it out. And something, obviously, that therapist or psychologist, psychiatrist said, resonated and clicked with you, right? And then it was like, when you were describing it, I could see that shift. And I had a similar shift. Mine was reading a book when I was my freshman year of college, when I was suicidal. And one of my favorite professors that I idolized, like, recommended this book. And he's like, kind of in passing, he was giving his lecture, and he's like, oh, and by the way, I read this book when I was younger, changed my life, made me who I am today. Anywho, back to, religions of the world.
Yeah.
And I didn't hear a word he said for the rest of the thing. I ran right to the library after. Thank God they had the book. To this day, I'm like, what would have happened if they didn't have that book? And I just devoured it. And the book was called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, which I'm sure you've heard of. I've read it probably 30 times at this point, and it was written way back in, like, the 40s, like 80 years ago.
Arm's reach somewhere close to me. I have books everywhere.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. I know. I feel like if you're doing what we're doing, it's one of those key ones you have to read. And just anybody out there, it still holds up. Like I said, I mean, universal principles are universal principles. Things that stand the test of time, that have been around since the beginning. They'll be around till we destroy ourselves. To ignore them and to not live your life by them, you're just asking for trouble, right? Everybody thinks they can game and cheat the system. And the good news is you can kind of hack your brain, kind of just like what we were saying. Like, your brain wants to deceive you all the time. Like, there's all these things in place, and that, say, for instance, you get a bad grade in school for, you're a college student, and you think that it's going to be the end of the world if you get a bad grade, right? And your brain, like, builds this whole thing up, and then you get a bad grade, and it sucks for like a minute or a day, but then your happiness level actually doesn't change. Like, we catastrophize all these things. And then, there's examples, throughout everybody's lives that we're constantly catastrophizing, being like, oh my God, like, it's the worst thing ever. There's no way I could ever, get out of this. And that whole I call it a fixed victim in us, just kind of takes over. And then it's figuring out how you can get your brain going in that growth owner way, where it's like, no, I got the goods. I'm just like everybody else. I got weaknesses. I got fucking things that are wrong with me, and whatever. But I also got strengths, and I got good things going for me, and I'm gonna focus in on those. And that's really the key to life, like focusing on the things that you're good at and passionate about, that keep you moving and growing every single day, and then you'll never look back. But if you just sit there and dwell and are reading and all these things that don't make you happy, I mean, you'll end up suicidal, like you and I were.
100%. And two things. One, I love that you just cursed because I know I did already a couple times. I'm like, oh, we haven't. I don't know if that's kosher here.
It's kosher.
Okay. And the other thing, and this was a huge turning point. It's actually become, you know, a foundational piece of, you know, the work that I do now, which is really understanding the basics of the nervous system. Right? I don't think you need to become like a neuroscientist or any of these kind of things in order to change your life, but, you know, understanding the basics. And one of the things that really helped me better understand who I was biologically speaking, and why I was, you know, why it was so difficult to make some of the changes that I knew I wanted to make, you know, which before I understood this piece that I'm about to share, I would use all of those struggles and, you know, call it failures, whatever it was, in pursuit of what I wanted or who I wanted to become. I would use those struggles as evidence of my brokenness, right? When in fact, there's no such thing as a broken human.
Right. That's the fixed victim and you going, oh, poor me. See, look, I knew I was broken and I knew, right?
Yeah. And I think this happens because none of us are really ever, you know, given this piece, which is, so your nervous system, right, it has one objective, and I mean just one, and it's your physical survival, right? It does not give one damn about your hopes, your dreams, your goals, the car you drive, the blue check mark on your whatever. Like, it doesn't care about any of this. All it cares about is your physical survival. And it is hardwired to avoid very specific experiences in order to increase your chances of survival in any given moment. And those are, in no particular order, but the first one would be pain. Right? Anything that causes the human being pain, if you allow it to persist, will eventually lead to harm or death, physical and emotional, both, right?
Right.
So physical's obvious, something's beating on you, you allow that thing to continue, harm or death. But the other, I think, is the more common experience that we have, which is the emotional pain. And what this looks like is if anything's causing you a great deal of emotional pain, if you allow it to persist, it will eventually lead to harm or death. What this often looks like is disease, depression, or worst case scenario, suicide. These are, you know, long-term evidence of emotional pain unresolved. So the first thing we're hardwired to avoid is emotional pain. That's why we don't like to talk about our insecurities and all that kind of stuff, right? Because it's painful. And then the second thing, and this is where I feel like, you know, a lot of people collect that evidence, right? And that thing that we're hardwired to avoid is anything unknown, right? Anything unknown to you specifically. Doesn't matter if your best friend knows it, your dad, your mentor, you know, the people you follow on social. If it's easy for them, it doesn't matter. If you yourself have not experienced this thing, your nervous system sees it as a direct threat to your survival, right? Because if you think about us, you know, biologically, you know, back many moons ago, had we gone hunting for our tribe and come across an animal that neither of us knew, we'd never seen this thing before, you know, we would have no way of being able to predict how to protect ourselves or how to avoid it. So being in the unknown equaled death.
Yeah.
Right? So the same, we're on a primitive system in a modern world, right? It's like if your iPhone, iPhone, whatever it is today, right? Fully capable of doing all the things, but if you're still operating on the original iOS, whatever software, doesn't matter what the device itself could do, it's not going to perform beyond the software or the conditioning, right? Humans are the exact same thing. You know, our bodies grow up, but our emotional awareness never will unless we make the conscious effort to raise it.
Well, I love all this, and this I'm actually taking right now. Are you familiar with the Yale happiness course? Have you heard of this?
I've heard of, but I'm not familiar with the content.
It was this woman created it several years ago. It ended up being the most popular course that Yale ever offered. So popular, in fact, that they took it. They had to take it online because they couldn't. They were like filling the auditorium, and now it's on Coursera. So anybody that's interested can take it. But I'm taking it right now. It's so like some of the stuff you're talking about was resonating. And one of the things that the section I'm on right now, they were talking about is like, right, our Paleolithic brains, right? We're still wired certain ways. And what's happening now is there's this juxtaposition of modern technology and all this stuff and the world we're living in, giving us all these things that we think that we want and will make us happier, right? It's like we're basically doing everything we can for us to do less. When you actually kind of think about what everything's kind of like, how can I do just this and get everything I want? And there's quite a bit you can do that with now. I mean, you can get your food delivered. That's the business I used to run, restaurant delivery service, like a DoorDash or Grubhub. You can get yourself delivered in a car anywhere you want to go. You can get anything within 24 hours, 2 hours now, from Amazon, all these groceries, whatever. And it's making us, what's happening is it's eroding our discipline. It's making us less happy because we're having to go out. We're not like, we're built to want to go out and to grow and to do things and to interact with other humans. And the less we do that, and then not only that, compounded is we're then looking at comparing ourselves to others on social media and on TV. We see, oh, why can't I drive that car? Like, why does he have this? And I don't, why is she so pretty and skinny? Meanwhile, people forget the fact that when people are posting on social media, if you picture this, like, think about like 1,000 moments in your life, you're going to post the best one, right, of that 1,000. So it's like, it's not real life. It's people are just posting their best stuff. And then people look at that and they're like, oh, I want that life. It's like, if you probably have that life. And so kind of what I'm getting to is one of the things that's really neat, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier in the conversation, is there's this thing in our brain that tries to trick us, and we go, I can't remember the term, but it basically says, okay, I have to have that, and if I don't get that, I won't be happy. But here's the rub. Even if you get that, so they use an example of somebody making $50,000, you ask them, so that's their baseline. And they go, okay, well, what would make you happy? Like, you think salary wise? Well, 100,000. Okay. So then they make 100. So then you interview people making 100,000. Are they jumping up and down because they doubled their salary and they got what they wanted? No. You know what they're doing? They're saying, what would make me happy? 250,000. Right. And it's just this never ending. And like you said, if you're not aware that this is how we're programmed and how our brains work, and the fact that you're going to just always be chasing and you're going to always want more, and there's going to be now more and more stuff around us showing us how other people have more, and it should be so easy to get. I mean, you're screwed. You're screwed because you'll never kind of develop that because life still takes hard work. I mean, even like these influencers and stuff, like they spend a lot of time doing this stuff. And, I feel like a lot of people just see, oh, I can do that. And, it's like, no, like anybody that ends up making it long-term. I mean, yeah, somebody might get a viral video and they may pop for a minute, but if they want to turn that into like a monetary thing for a long period of time, they have to put in a lot of hard work and effort. And you can't just click a button and snap your fingers like everybody thinks you can.
No, and you're absolutely correct. And something I love to kind of talk about here is a conversation around judgment, right? The comparison judgment, thing that we do. And again, it all comes back to our physical survival. Right? It seems like, when I say like, oh, the idea of it scares you to death is because it actually does, right? It seems a little dramatic, like, oh, how is it going live equal, how my death, right? But to your nervous system, to the primitive part of the body, it's exactly what it's experiencing. And if you think about the comparison, for example, one, we're human beings, we're hardwired for connection, right? We require connection to actually survive. We're tribal creatures. And the comparison thing is the idea, for example, let's say back in like the Roman era, right? And let's say our castle, let's say me and you are citizens or soldiers and our castle is being attacked. What would we do for our king and queen? All right, what do you think? If we're soldiers or citizens and our castle's under
In
attack,
this
what
day
would
and
we
age,
do?
or like
Back then, right? What
back
would we do
then, you
for
would have probably given your life and fought to the death to defend your king and queen, right?
100%? So what it is status equals survival, right? If we are of a higher status in our society, the likelihood of us surviving an attack is much greater because those around us will protect us. Right? It's like the elder in the tribe, right? We
I
protect the
haven't heard
chief.
that one. That's interesting. You're right. I totally agree with that. And I would, there's another example. Sorry to interrupt you, but
No, you're good.
Another I think instinct goes even further back to Paleolithic days when it was like the more power, influence. What they didn't have money back then, but the more you had, maybe you had a bigger house, maybe you had better weapons, maybe you had more people around you. Like I guess that does tie in like protecting you, right? And it goes back to right. It's that's hardwired into our brains.
Physical survival, right? And everything that triggers us, you could boil down to one very specific thing, which is safety, right? And when I say safety, I do mean physical survival, not emotional comfort, right? That's the thing too. Is a lot of us have this idea, or this hope, rather. I know I did, that our healing or our purpose, call it, when we find it, we'll know because it'll be easy. It'll just be so, man, when it clicks, it's just going to be the easiest thing in the world. That's how I'm going to know it's for me.
Right. Right. No.
Couldn't be further from it. It's
Totally.
your purpose, because it's bigger than, right? It's going to require that you daily, consistently live just beyond that known, right? Live just beyond that comfort zone, as we often describe it. So which means your nervous system is going to be like going ape shit trying to protect you, because it's like, wait, don't do that. We can't predict what's on the other side because we've never been there. Right. Meanwhile, your purpose, I heard it described not too long ago, actually, and it really resonated. Someone said that, your body, your physical body is hardwired for the familiar, right? But your soul is hardwired for growth, which is really this internal battle that we're experiencing.
That's a good one.
It hit me like a ton of bricks when I heard this gentleman say it. It was just like, oh, this is that internal, like, what's wrong with me thing that we often use as evidence that we're not good enough or we're not whatever enough. Instead, it's literally just your biology kind of rubbing up against your soul's desire, your purpose on this planet to grow and become something. And that's something I'd like to plug here too in this conversation, is that so I have a working theory. I see it play out in my life, and I'm seeing it work really well in other people that I work with closely. But it's this idea of, like we were talking about, if I achieve something, I'll feel something specific. I'll feel a certain way about myself, right? When I get that 250,000, then whatever that thing is that we're pursuing. And as you've experienced and described, all of these external achievements, they're really nothing more than false summits beyond a certain point, right? There's our literal needs, right? You need to make a certain amount of money to be able to provide necessities, right? At least in our day. We need a certain level of connection to be able to, satisfy those basic human needs. But beyond a certain point, they're really just a series of false summits. Yes, exciting, right? But if we have the expectation that, call it the 250,000 a year, is going to make me feel freedom, going to make me feel happy, going to make me feel some way about myself, then what often happens is we work our ass off, right?
Right. Then you're right. You're ignoring all the things that actually make you happy, right?
Yeah.
These other areas of your life, like relationships, your physical health, your emotional health, your stress. You're doing it, thinking, if I could just make this amount of money, then it'll all be fixed. But yes, continue.
Right. So then you get there, and yes, it's really exciting and rewarding for a short period of time because you finally did it. But if your expectation was that it was going to provide some sense of freedom or significance for you, what you're often left with then is now what? An identity crisis, quite frankly, right? And the theory I'm working with here is like, so imagine this for a second. So instead of being motivated to achieve something, so that you feel a certain way about yourself? What if you focused on becoming something, right? And then imagine what that person could achieve. For example, the word that I find that is really come up a lot, and this is the one that resonates with me most, is becoming someone you're proud of.
Yeah. That's very good. That reminds me, there's a book called another great book, Atomic Habits by James Clear. Have you read
I've
that?
not read it, but I'm familiar.
Great book. He talks about how it's about changing who you are through, and habits are his whole thing. And I couldn't agree more. Habits are pretty much the center of everything I do as well. Because at the end of the day, it's your habits are you. You're on autopilot most of the time, and we go through life, and whether it was a trauma, whether it was an event, whether it was just the low hanging fruit, we started developing this habit of looking at our phones all the time, or we have all these, I call them failure habits, and we're not aware of them, and we're just kind of on autopilot. And his whole thing was like, don't make it your goal to be like, I want to stop overeating. I want to exercise more, but like you were just saying, like change the person, the core of who you are, and then that person, and then it starts to kind of radiate out from that, and like that's your goal. And the way he says to do that is you start changing your habits, and you kind of say, this is the type of person I want to be, and you start changing your habits, and then before you know it, it kind of all compounds on top of itself, because one good habit begets the next and the next, and then you start replacing those failure habits with these success habits. And then before you know, and so like the way I do it, I actually have, and I'm building an app to kind of help people to do this, which I'm excited about. But right now I use a spreadsheet, and it's like I have a list of every single habit that I do, whether it's neutral, bad, or good. And the neutral are in black, the bad are in red, and the good are in green. And my goal is to basically make them all green. Right? Even the black ones, it's like an opportunity. Like a neutral habit, like waking up in the morning. Okay, it's like, okay, I wake up in the morning, but then what's my first thing that I'm doing? Right? What am I then? Am I grabbing my phone and scrolling through social media, or am I picking up a book? Whatever it is, that there's just all these opportunities throughout the day. And he uses this term called habit stacking, which is cool too. So you kind of like, to be more efficient with it, it's like you stack this habit with this habit with this habit, and all of a sudden, like in one fail motion, you're doing 3 or 4 success habits. Like for me in the morning, when I take my shower, I recite my mantra to myself, I do my stretches, and I do my breathing exercises, and then I remind myself what I'm grateful for. And I come out of that shower, and then I play Alexa, and I've got Will's playlist, and she knows all my favorite songs. And I'm fucking ready to go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That versus sitting in the shower, a failure habit would be, oh God, I got all the shit I got to do today. And just like, I didn't get my stuff done yesterday. I'll probably not get it done today. Like the difference in how your day is going to go based on that. Incredible.
100%. And so one of the things that I'm finding too is that, if anyone that's sitting there like, well, what's a good habit? What's a bad habit? What's a successful habit? Right? They're all kind of, in many ways, vague terms to most of us, right? They're just specific enough to satisfy a conversation, but not specific enough to actually create an action or a behavior change, right? So for instance, the word success, for anyone listening, being able to ask yourself, okay, what is my definition of success? Right? And I don't mean the definition that I think my father would be proud of, or that I think my girlfriend would like, or, that my boss would want me to write down on my form tomorrow at work. But like, what is success to me? And most of us have no idea, right? Because again, we're social creatures, and going back to the early childhood patterns, right? Like, so from 0 to 6, we established over 60% of what we believe to be true about ourselves and the world around us. Right? So 0 to 6 years old, you're establishing a well over half of what will eventually become your personal identity, unchecked, right? And then the other part of that, and this is why I brought this up, is that during that same time frame, 0 to 6, I know you have small children, right?
Yep.
So you're seeing this run around your house all day long.
I got two and a half, and 5.5, so I'm right in there.
There we go. Right? So those children are, during this time of their life, they're also 100% dependent on their caregivers to meet every single physical and emotional need required for their survival. So what this means is, and we're all this way, every single one of us, what this means is that our patterns of survival are initially rooted in dependency. So we learn how to act in order to receive. If I act a certain way, my father will tell me he's proud. If I act a certain way, my mother holds me, feeds me, celebrates me, punishes me, ignores me, whatever the story is, right? Whatever the learning is. So what happens is we're all rooted in this performance-based survival, right? I must learn how to act in order to receive. So this idea of, you know, I may not know my definition of success, but yours. Yeah, I'll do that one. Because if I can perform in relation to your definition, then you're more likely to accept me.
Yeah.
Right? Now we have connection, and now I get to survive because I got someone else with me.
Right.
Versus if I have my own definition and you don't agree with it, oh shit. Right? That's a threat. Right. That's a risk. Mm-hmm. So most of us, when you hear this, like, just be more authentic, just be yourself. Very few of us know what that person is or what they would be interested in, because we're hardwired, or I won't say that, we're conditioned to, it's safer for us to know what you expect of me and me to learn how to perform accordingly than it is for me to sit with myself and understand what it is that I desire, and then spend the time that it would take for me to attract or find a like tribe, right? It's much safer and much easier for me to just, you know, stay in the flow of what my mom and dad expect, right? My original tribe, if you will.
Yeah.
Right? So I think it's extremely important. And going back to the idea of defining, one word that constantly comes up more than success is freedom. Right? Everyone is just seeking everyone wants to just become free from something, right? So being able to identify what is your definition of freedom, and, you know, as a business person, entrepreneur, I'm sure you can relate to this. Like, what I believe, because I support a lot of people in executive positions and entrepreneurs, etc., is being able to identify your definition of freedom, and then you get to build a business or a life that supports that definition, instead of building a business or a life that appears impressive and hoping that that feels like freedom, right? When in most cases, a lot of people build a really impressive life, and all they've done is created a prison built out of gold bars.
Yeah, totally. No, that's a really good point, because it's true. I mean, and more, I mean, studies, this isn't just us shooting shit about it. I mean, we are becoming more and more obsessed with money and things and power and fame, and, you know, everybody, and that's the culture we live in. I call it this, you know, it's this broken society that we grow up in, and it's really the whole world. I mean, some countries are better than others. United States, in my opinion, is the king of just, you know, gluttonous, like, you know, more will make me happy. And I mean, that's how we raise our kids, and that's how we go through school. And that's what, you know, one of my missions is to change that from a fundamental level, like start teaching our children stuff that actually will make them happy, versus preparing them to go get a job that they might be miserable in. And then at the end of their life, they go, oh shit, I did that all wrong. I should have, you know, and yeah, like what you're just saying, it's like figuring out what it is that actually makes you happy, your definition of freedom, and building your life around that, versus I should do this because that's what everybody else is doing. And it is a natural, that's also a primal instinct to want to have more money and more power and more fame, for the same reason we were talking about earlier. It's survival. You know, the more of that stuff you have, the better your chance of survival. But right,
it's
like
not
Tim
wrong.
Fair. What's that?
It's not wrong to desire those things.
Right.
It's not inappropriate.
Exactly. It is what it is. It's our brains playing, again, like we were talking earlier, kind of playing a trick on us. And then if you're not aware of it, you pursue that. And like you said, I like that, prison made of gold bars. I'm going to write that down. That's it. I mean, how many wealthy, I mean, and so they actually, this study, going back to this happiness study, the course that I'm taking, one of the things they did is they did this huge study of like, how much happier are you incrementally after a certain dollar amount. And they found $75,000, at least in the United States. Anything over that, you're not incrementally becoming happier. I mean, is that not insane? And so, like, I mean, there's a lot of people that can claim that salary. Not everybody, right? But when you get to that, because then like you're saying, you've got your basic needs, you've got this, you get that, and then it's like, okay, figure out what is freedom to you. Like Tim Ferriss just went and traveled around the world. That was freedom to him. That's what made it interesting. And you can do that these days for hardly any money. And all these wealthy people out there that we just all are striving to be, there's so many that are miserable. I mean, I'm the perfect example. I knew it was coming. I sold my business a couple years ago for a huge sum, total for the business. And my sum, the amount that I personally got was enough to where I technically didn't have to work for the rest of my life. And like you were saying earlier, it felt great for a moment, for we'll call it a week. I was like, it was like this huge, it was a 9-year struggle. And the amount of time and happiness I gave up in that time, in that amount of time, I can never get back. And so it's like, more than anything, it's like, this thing's off my shoulders. But then it was very quickly like, okay, now what? Now where do I go? What's my next growth? It wasn't, I can finally go and sit on a beach and drink a pina colada.
Yeah, no one wants the Mai Tais. Not every day.
No one wants what?
The Mai Tais. Like, not every day.
Right. It's fun for a short period, like a vacation. But then your mind, it goes back to we are wired to always be growing, ABG. And if you are not growing, if you are not moving in a direction and pursuing something and passionate, and you are never going to be happy. And if you just rest on your laurels, I mean, you look throughout history, tons of famous celebrities and stuff that they got money and fame, and then they just kind of like got fat and got into drugs. And I mean, every documentary you see on a rock group, it's the same story over and over again. Most of those people were absolutely miserable.
Yep.
Oh, I just saw Oasis. I love documentaries. So, I mean, I watched the Bee Gees, same story. Like, he's the only one left. He didn't talk to one of his brothers for years and years, and then his brother died. It was all about like, who's the better singer, who's making more money in the band. Oasis, two brothers, haven't spoken to each other in like 20 years. One of the biggest bands on the planet. And same thing, they let the money and the fame and the greed all get to them. And it's like, we look at those people and go, oh, they made it. Meanwhile, they're fucking miserable.
Miserable. Right? Like fucking miserable, most of them. So what I want to share right now is something that I identify as the purpose formula, because I believe everything, and you talk about pursuit of happiness and all that stuff, I think purpose is the thing that we are being called towards. And, I believe all of us believe that we each have a purpose, even if we don't know what it is at the moment, right? Or it seems elusive in some way or another. Interestingly enough, a study that was recently done showed that 87% of adult Americans believe that they're living a life without any sense of purpose, right? All while all of them believe, the majority, almost 100% of them, said that they believe they had one, right? So it's this real interesting perspective. And in pursuing this and looking at my own life, what I've come up with is this idea of the purpose formula, which is simply pain plus passion times safety equals purpose. Okay, so I'll explain this quickly. Go ahead. Do you have a question?
I'm writing that pain. I want to understand this. Pain plus passion
times safety equals purpose.
Okay. Yeah. Explain it.
So bring it together very quickly. I believe that so the ability to extract the wisdom from your deepest struggles in life, right? Your pain, right?
Yep.
And it's that idea of fixed victim versus, so are you a victim or have you been victimized? Right? There's a difference. Right. So being able to look at your struggles and extract the wisdom, right? The lessons, the learning from them, plus passion. A lot of us have been conditioned to believe that purpose is found inside of our passion. Couldn't be further from the truth. This is why people can pursue their passions, become extremely successful, and feel more lost and void of happiness than anything ever, although they've achieved all the things like we've described, right? So you have extract the wisdom from your pain, plus passion. I believe your passion is the vehicle in which you get to deliver that wisdom to the world. Whether you're an artist, a businessman, a devoted parent, whatever it is, all the above, right? Your passions are the vehicles in which you get to deliver. It's like, if you could just pick a vehicle, what's your dream car right now?
Range Rover Hybrid.
Perfect. So let's say you get the Range Rover Hybrid. What's more important to you, the Range Rover itself or your family that you get to drive around in it?
Family.
Right. So family in this case would be the wisdom. The Range Rover is the passion that you get to deliver that family to, wherever you want to go.
Yeah.
And
like
then
that.
time safety. So why do I multiply this? Because to my knowledge, no one's ever OD'd on safety, right? And from my understanding, the root of all human behavior, extreme violence or extreme isolation and everything in between, is safety, right? So time safety in this equation is qualified support. And what I mean by qualified is not solely the degrees and certifications and badges and all the things, but more importantly than that, it's the personal experience. Have you been through what you are supporting others in facing, right? And this is where my belief stems from. I truly believe that it's all of the things that you once believed disqualified you from your dreams or your goals. Those are the things that are what actually make you highly qualified to be able to support those who you're uniquely designed to support.
Yep.
Right? My story, sexual abuse, drugs, near suicide, not going to be relatable to everyone, right? But who that story is for could be life-changing.
Yep.
Right?
Right.
So all of this together, extract the wisdom from your pain, again, hardwired to avoid that part, which is why so many people, I think, are living without purpose, because they're trying to passion in hopes of finding it, the
Right.
stuff that feels good, instead of the thing we're hardwired to avoid, which is pain. That's the wisdom. Then identifying the vehicle, and then finding your qualified support, be it mentorship, coaching, it's community of some sort, but the community that's got a similar future, not just one that has a similar past.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, that's great. I like that equation. I love equations. Yeah, I'm a big equation guy too. That's a good one. I call it the equation of life is mine, and it's basically your belief system plus your repeated actions plus time equals who you become. It's a little simpler than yours. Yours is got more layers, but what's going on up here? Again, like, are you a growth owner? Are you a fixed victim? Kind of your mindset. It all your actions spring from that. And then time, just like we were saying earlier, you can't be happy by hitting a button for $9.99, right? Yeah, and we get those little dopamine hits every time we order that package from Amazon, or every time right? But that's not making us happier. It's figuring out what it is that makes you happy, and then you start taking those actions on that, and then let that compound, and then those become your habits, and then your habits become who you are. So you're either going to go up or down. So 2 equations to end it with for all you people. That was awesome, man. I like to always end with the question of, since speaking of habits, is there one habit that you feel that you didn't used to have, that since you went through this transformation in your life about 4 years ago, you've now developed, that has changed your life for the better?
Cold showers.
Please explain.
Cold showers. I absolutely love them. Because they're difficult. And this came to me, I don't know if you're familiar with Wim Hof and like his teachings and all of that, but there's a lot of research on, cold therapy and all this kind of stuff. But what led me to start this, again, at that stage where I was really struggling, and I'd begun to learn a little bit about the nervous system and, how to regulate the nervous system and retrain, or basically condition it for a life that I would be proud of. Right. And it was presented to me like cold showers are a practice. Right. And you are consciously choosing to go into to experience something that's going to trigger the body physiologically into fight freeze being ironic. Right. But because you want to do the opposite in that situation. You want to get out. But you're training the body to experience this activation while in a safe space. So you're able to actually work through the strategies, the breath work, for example, to regulate your body while it's experiencing discomfort. So take that practice now into, a difficult conversation with your partner. Your body's activated in the exact same ways physiologically, but because you're in this practice, you're capable of being more conscious of how you want to respond. Right? Regulate yourself, take a breath, whatever you need, ground yourself, versus being reactive, right? And probably doing a bunch of shit that you're going to have to later apologize for.
Yeah.
Done the
Wow.
research.
A lot. Yeah. Very good, my man. Well, thank you. That's that's first time I've heard that one, and I love it. Great explanation as well.
Yeah, a lot of people are like, nope.
No, right. I mean, well, people swear by, everybody's got different methods. And like we were saying at the beginning of the show, it's like, just experiment and try things. You never know what's going to resonate with you. Maybe a cold shower doesn't work for somebody else. And for you, like, game changer. Best habit you could have ever developed. So, like, and you even commented earlier, we're all built differently, our brains, our bodies. So there's no one way to do things. Just keep trying things, keep taking action, figure out what resonates with you, figure out how to, that's what I help people, like, kind of, you want to trick your brain into stopping doing a lot of these things we talked about on this program today, that's hurting versus helping you. It's causing you to be stuck in, I call it, this failure loop versus, hop out and get into your success loop. So
one thing I'll say here really quickly is, if there's another habit, it's a thought process, and it's curiosity over judgment. Right? So if you catch yourself judging something, good, bad, or indifferent, doesn't matter how you're judging, but if you catch yourself in judgment, become curious. Instead of, I hate that because boom, 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 like, what is it about that I don't like?
Yeah, I love that.
So this shit,
totally.
Right? Like, this isn't for me because it's difficult. What is it about this that is so difficult for me?
That's a universal principle right there. I mean, think about how the world would be in politics and just everything that, right now the world is split 50-50, pretty much. And again, going back to our broken system, the political system, but I won't go into that. If everybody, like, instead of coming to the other person with their fists doubled, sort of stepped back and said, okay, tell me more about your opinion. I want to understand where you're coming from more. Like, holy shit, would that be? And you may end up still disagreeing, but at least you can understand them and empathize more. What's that book?
It's called The Culture Code. I just started it last night, and it goes into how to develop the secrets of highly successful groups. And it tells a story of World War I, where both parties actually, during a truce, became really integrated and friends because their bunkers were actually so close to one another. They've been killing each other for months, and then all of a sudden they're like singing and cooking for each other and telling story. It's
very cool. My dog is starting to grumble, and there's somebody at my door, so perfect way to end it. Dude, Matthew, this was awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed it, bro. Let's keep in touch.
That's it for the 5 Core Life. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that like button on this video and pound that subscribe button so you get notified when new episodes drop. Also, please fill out the free 5 Core Life Evaluator quiz. It's a great way to get a baseline of where you are in the 5 cores and which of the 5 cores you need support. In addition, you'll get some actionable advice that you can apply and start improving your life in the areas that you need it most. That's it for today's episode of the 5 Core Life Podcast. Have a wonderful day.
Get moving. Gain momentum. Join the movement. Join Emmett by going to moremomentum.com to take a free life